Now, without any further delay, I would like to turn today's meeting over to our presenter, Clementino de Mendoza. Clementino, you now have the floor.
Hey guys, welcome to today's presentation. I would like to basically start this Scrum and Agile Management with Visual Studio 2012 presentation by talking a little bit about my previous experience with Visual Studio. I was actually with Microsoft for 8 years, and half of it was spent as part of the National Services ALM team. During that time, I had my best time at Microsoft, which was working as the MSF, one of the MSF planners for Visual Studio. So the process template that you guys saw in Visual Studio 2010, MSF for Agile, MSF for CMMI, has some of my input in it. And I also helped at least make the move to also adding a Scrum template. So this was being worked out several years ago. I'm also a Microsoft Visual Studio ALM Ranger, for those of you who are not familiar with it. It's a group of people interested in ALM and that work closely with the product team by enhancing some of the capabilities that are not out-of-the-box part of TFS. I'm also a professional Scrum trainer with Scrum.org, especially on the Professional Scrum Developer course. So therefore, I'm going to be talking about some of my experiences with that as well. Let's start by remembering a little bit about the Agile Manifesto, right? We're uncovering better ways of developing software by doing it and helping others do it. Through this work, we have come to value individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and responding to change over following a plan. I want to emphasize the last phrase, which is, while there is value on the items on the right, we value the items on the left more. So there is value on the items on the right. I've seen in several conversations with my Agile peers that they tend to sometimes forget that there is value in processes and tools, in doing some documentation, in negotiating a contract and following a plan. It's just that when push comes to shove, if you have to make a decision, you have to value more the input that you get from individuals and interactions, from kicking the tires of working software and collaborating with the customer, talking face-to-face and finding out what exactly they want, and finally being flexible to respond to change when the time comes. But that said, let's move on and talk a little bit about how this is enabled in TFS. Agile is an umbrella. So when we talk about Agile, we're talking about a dozen people that participated of the initial Agile Manifesto meeting. And there were several methodologies represented. We had the SDM, Feature-Driven Development, FDD, some couple of representatives from Lean, Crystal from Alistair Coburn, Extreme Programming from Kent Beck, and finally Scrum from Ken Schwaber. But all these methodologies, they come together and they express the same set of fundamentals, right? Individuals and interactions, working software, customer collaboration, responding to change. So whenever I talk about a specific technique here, I'm going to be using the Scrum template as a demo. Those apply to all Agile methods in the large. Sometimes it's just a matter of nomenclature, and sometimes it's different in processes and the way that you structure things. But the essential ideas are there. TFS is useful to manage any kind of projects based on an Agile method, and all the process templates that come with TFS are Agile. Sometimes you will hear that MSF CMMI is not Agile. If you talk to David Anderson, who was the original creator, he will adamantly defend the fact that Agile MSF CMMI was created using Agile principles and to fulfill an Agile need in the CMMI SCI space. That said, when I say all kinds of projects, I also mean waterfall projects, right? You can create or adapt any process template and work it out in a waterfall manner. Well, waterfall has been kind of going into a decline, at least from a mindshare perspective. As you can see here by one of the latest Chaos Manifesto reports, you notice that there is already a marked difference between success from the Waterfall versus Agile kind of projects. As you can see here, the fact that you're having Agile projects being considered more successful, 42% as opposed to 14% in terms of the Waterfall, right? Makes it very clear that the adoption is happening in a way that is unprecedented. So right now, most people would say that they identify themselves with doing some kind of agile software development at some point. And Waterfall is being left out as some sort of a legacy. I'm not going to go into the specifics of into the nuances of differentiating what's Waterfall, what's Agile. There's also the question of what we call the governance tier. Sometimes you have very big programs that have to behave in a Waterfall manner from a product management perspective at the very high level, but allow the teams to fulfill or behave in a fine-grained manner as pure Agile, meaning either XP, Scrum, or whatever other way of doing things. But bottom line is that this is not this big way of doing things, program management, if you will, is not Waterfall. It's called what we call the governance tier, and it can be perceived as Waterfall. What we call Waterfall is really taking all the requirements first, then making all the design second, then doing all the development and then testing, delivery, with never coming back to getting the requirements. This today has been understood that it can only be done in very, very specific situations, sometimes when you have very well-defined, reused requirements. So the applicability has become a lot smaller nowadays. So this is the kind of Waterfall that I'm talking about. You can still do it with Team Foundation Server. Nothing prevents you from doing that. The bottom line is that we would like to think of Agile being an umbrella, right? Making sure that you understand that the techniques here apply to specifically all Agile methods in the large, and that you can still do Waterfall with whatever kind of a tool you want, even if you use TFS. The way that Agile works with TFS is by minimizing barriers to delivery. Now, on that, I want to make a point here. Most likely you have been listening to a lot of those presentations coming from several ALM Rangers or ALM MVPs or from Microsoft APE folk. The presentation that I'm doing today kind of reverses the way we see things, right? We're looking at the tool, but first from an Agile perspective. First, Agile as an enabler minimizes barriers to delivering value. You might see this same picture here as used with just TFS, and it's fine because TFS embodies the principles of Agile. But Agile in itself is what we're talking about, is the process, the way that you use the tool. The tool can be a constraint or can be an engagement, liberator, or an enabler. That's the word that I wanted to use. But it's the process, the way that you use it, that's going to drive the way things work. If you look into the value delivery impediments, this is has become kind of a classic slide from Microsoft presentations. You will see that you have, from the ideation perspective, misunderstood requirements, and then from the development perspective, a lot of churn between requirements and the priorities, and people changing things all the time, only thinking about quality as an afterthought. There's no way to find out exactly how one thing connects to the other, different tools, different tool sets. And from the operations perspective, you have tools that don't talk to one another, and you don't know exactly what's going on in production. So sometimes you have all this cycle of change happening without a clear picture of how things are flowing. So as I said, you have already probably seen this slide already. Now I changed the traditional slide that follows this to provide solutions from the Agile point of view, right? So from the Agile point of view, the way that you fix those issues with ideation is to capture stories in a backlog. So it's one of the techniques. But essentially what we're going to do is we want to create a list of items that can be ordered and prioritized by the customer so that we can proceed correctly. So talking about Agile strategies, you will have teams when doing development to collaborate on scope and priorities and how those are negotiated within the team. You will have a built-in quality cycle where you have ways of ascertaining from the very beginning that you're doing the right thing, and you will focus on delivering software all the time from a small prototype in the beginning to working software at the end of the first iteration. And the same thing applies to the production side. It's the way that you do Agile in the production side today has been known as something called DevOps. So DevOps is not a tool thing. It's a way of doing things. It's an outspring of the Agile movement when applied to the way that you do things in production. So you want to expedite your production delivery capability by allowing continuous delivery to your production environment. So we're going to take a look here at Agile in Visual Studio 2012 from a Scrum perspective. That's what we've been doing so far. And in the detail, remember that Scrum is sort of a representative in one way or another of all the Agile principles. So that's why I'm saying that whatever you see here, as explained to Scrum, will apply in terms of the Agile principles to all the other Agile methodologies or methods. Well, the main thing that I would like to say here is that if I go back to the original first principle, which is individuals and interactions over processes and tools, what does that translate to in the Agile world? It means that you want the processes and the tools to be transparent, to not get in the way of the information flow between individuals and the work that they're doing. And the way that the tools can do this is by not being in the way, allowing the team to work unimpeded, right? So that the processes that you defined for Scrum and others, they are naturally enacted. That is, they are brought to reality as transparently as possible. Gartner, after a few iterations of Visual Studio, has finally recognized Visual Studio and Microsoft as the leaders in this effort. There is a report that you can get for free. I might, show it to you when I get to the virtual machine in just a bit. But essentially, Microsoft has come from, not even being in the map to finally being able to be considered to be the leader by Gartner. However, the point is that tools by themselves can't do any miracle. They're just enablers. I, see that sort of the tools as being sort of an exoskeleton, the kinds that you see in movies or even as used right now by the American Army and other places, that will help you do tasks but will not get in the way. They will reinforce you. They will reinforce your movements so that you can do them with precision and do them with a clear understanding of what the results should be. So they enforce, but they don't get in the way. That's the difference between process enactment and process automation. Automation sort of forces you into a straitjacket and makes you go from this place to that, and there's no flexibility, and you can't move, and if you want to do something slightly different from the routine, you can't. But Visual Studio doesn't do that. Visual Studio 2012 and for that matter TFS and all the other tools such as Microsoft Test Manager, The objective is for them to be able to help you or augment your capability and not necessarily automate or replace you in doing things. And by the way, that is how Visual Studio allows the tool part in this individuals and interactions over processes and tools principle to be enacted. Meaning, the way that this principle is enacted or brought to life is that the tools don't get in the way. Any Agile management tool, to be called that, should not be too difficult to use, should not be getting in the way of doing your daily work. Should be able to capture the results of your daily activities and naturally add them or aggregate the results and provide you with the information that you need to move on. So as a representative method, Agile method, let's take a look at Scrum and the Scrum pillars. I'm making a reference all the time here of something called the Scrum Guide that you can get at the scrum.org, Scrum Guides. It's a short document that summarizes the principles as defined by Scrum. It's actually about 16 pages, right? But it's very nicely crafted. And the first part of the Scrum Guide talks about all the parts that define Scrum. So you have the team events that go through Scrum, which are similar to all the events from all the other Agile methodologies. Sometimes they're different just in terms of nomenclature. The artifacts that are being produced and how being done, what being done means for an Agile team. So we're going to go over those pillars and relate them to how TFS and Visual Studio 2012 allow you to enact them in your day-to-day processes. So teams for Agile, they're self-organizing. They are cross-functional, right? Scrum, for that matter, doesn't recognize any team members other than developer, meaning that if you're a tester, you're a developer. If you're somebody who's a build master, you're a developer, and so on. So bottom line is everybody's a developer. You do have a Scrum Master that enforces pretty much the method, the Scrum method. And you have the product owner who pretty much owns the requirements and what's going to be delivered. Other parts of the principles are that you might have some specialized focus, as I referred to, and also the development teams do not contain subteams. So I did a quick summary of what was in the Scrum Guide. So now let's take a look at those principles and see how they are enacted with Visual Studio, right? So for that, I'm going to switch to the virtual machine. So guys, let me know if you can't see this well. I'll make adjustments, but if you go into Visual Studio 2012, as you can see here, if I go to Home, I can go to Settings. And in Settings, I'm actually able to change a few things in the Team Project Collection. One of them is the group membership. And as you can see here, I can have in my team project groups that pretty much can be defined in here. Notice that by default right now, the TFS groups that I have in this project collection, I'm looking at the project collection, by the way, not at the team collection. So at the project collection level, I have administrators and I have, ancillary groups that are related to the build, proxy, and service accounts, and test service as well, and then the collection of all valid users. So at the collection level, you don't really have any changes or any differences in how this is enforced. But if I go back and look at the team project level, right, As you can see here, I have essentially three types of users. I have contributors, project administrators, and readers. Well, if you remember how the team definition of Scrum is, everybody's a developer in Scrum, right? So it means that pretty much essentially everyone is part of the same team, and that includes the Scrum Master and the product owner. And here we have contributors, which pretty much could be the same or understood as being the same as quote-unquote developers, and project administrators, who are really the guys who are figuring the project. They're not necessarily the Scrum Masters, by the way, but they would be more like someone in the team who specializes in giving permissions to this and that resources. So this would be a specialization of a developer function, right? Or if you have a developer taking the team lead role or something like that, that would be a team lead who would be doing this. And finally, we have the readers. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with the chicken and pig image that Scrum has, in that those who are committed as part of the team, they are the quote-unquote pigs, and those who are just interested or have a vested interest in the project are called chicken. This comes from an image or an old saying that Ken Schreiber adopted to illustrate the following principle of being committed to something. So the saying goes that one day a chicken came to a pig and said, "Hey, what if we open a restaurant together? Let's make some money." And then the pig asked, "Well, how would name it? What would you like to do?" And then the chicken said, "Well, what about ham and eggs?" And then the pig said, "Well, no, thank you. I don't think so, because I would be committed, or you'd only be vested or interested, right? You're not really you're not giving your skin to be part of this team." So that's where the picture comes from, and the way that you differentiate between pig, quote-unquote pigs, and quote-unquote chicken is that the chicken will be the readers. Those are the guys who can see what's going on in the project, but they really do not provide any input to the project. They're just readers. If you are contributing something, then you're part of the team. You are a pig. And that's how the Scrum team concept is enacted within Visual Studio. Now, notice that this contributors and readers naming convention has been used for quite a while, since TFS 2005. Nothing prevents you from renaming or creating a new group that's called, team, and another called stakeholders, or if you want to be Scrumish to the core, call it pigs and chicken, right? But the idea is essentially displayed in here. Now, that said, some other methodologies such as FDD and the SDM, they have different ways of structuring the team. So, for instance, for FDD, you have something called the chief programmer. And without going too much into that, what I would say is that I've already seen implementations of other Agile methodologies such as FDD that pretty much rewrote this TFS group piece all together to create and use the nomenclature of the methodology. So it's definitely feasible. Nobody has been messing around with it from what I've seen in the last few years. If you look for it today, you will see that in the MSDN documentation for Visual Studio, can find MS CMMI documentation to create the CMMI older groups. And so it looks like we have questions. So Jana, would you like to read it?
Sure. It's from Joseph, and it says, can anyone with OS on their PCs connect to TFS as contributor or admin?
The answer is yes, meaning from what if I understand the question correctly, you're talking about any operating system, meaning you're in Linux or you are in, let's say, in Apple, in an Apple OS or something like that. I think so, meaning that you do have a web view of TFS, and that's exactly what we're looking at this point. Yes, that's exactly it, Joseph. As you can see here, this is a web access capability. So if I go here and I connect to Visual Studio, I'm able to connect to it. Now, for other OSs, I'm not sure if you're going to be prompted for entering authentication. As far as I know, you will. But I think that after you cache it, you should be able to go without the prompts. But I've already used it from Linux before. And in fact, Microsoft has an entire client for Linux. I can't recall if the client works for the Mac, which is a version of BSD, so I would have to check on that. But I'm pretty sure that for Linux you do have an entire, team client that works with TFS, and you can connect as a contributor and admin from there. Does that answer your question? While you answer, I'm going to continue here and talk a little bit more. So we talked about then how teaming is structured, right? But there is more. As you can see here, you can also add team members using, let's say that it's not going to be evident from here, but Microsoft has enabled, if you have federation enabled, you can actually use external teams or external identification providers such as Hotmail and so on as a way to add people to your team. You have to configure that though, but as long as you have that capability, it's going to flow naturally, which is something that before it was a problem for us working in the consulting industry, where you have to have external customers, product owners, right, joining the team, and they want to use their own ID. You don't really have a way to bring those guys in. So TFS allows you to do this as long as you have this configured. And if you'd like to see a way of doing this, you can go to TFS preview. Actually, it's called TFS. I'm going to go to preview. It's going to change to the other URL. I think it's I have it bookmarked on my other one here, guys. That's why I don't know the URL. I always go to the bookmark, and it is. Yep. So it's called TFS. I'm going to a project I created on the hosted service by Microsoft. So you're seeing this because I haven't updated the certificates yet, and I'll have to be clicking this for a while. There is a new hotfix that you have to apply to get all those certificates on, And I wasn't planning to show this on this virtual machine, but on my OS. I might actually change to my OS here for a minute since it's kind of being annoying a little bit. So let me do this. I'm going to share my other monitor, and that will allow us to take a look at what I'm talking about in terms of allow you guys to use this in a different fashion. So I'm just going to link and also sharing my secondary screen.
I can see it.
Hey, thank you. And as you can see here, I'm connected to a project I created at tfspreview.com, process improvement. It's actually not TFS Preview anymore, but that's the one that I have bookmarked in here. As you can see, I created a project and I added, a product backlog and so on. And notice that this is pretty much using users from a different set of domains. So, for instance, in this case here, I use my Hotmail account, as you can see. And I also used two people from Neudesic. And those accounts, as you can see, I can mix and match Hotmail accounts with Neudesic accounts. And this is all on the web. You guys can start working with this today. Just go to tfspreview.com and you should be able to get a free account, which is free up to 5 users. So going back to my virtual machine, so this is the second way that the team membership is, or the team capabilities are enacted using Visual Studio, right? You're able to transparently connect stakeholders, or in this case, the readers, and also the product owners from another company into TFS transparently. So this way, the tool doesn't get in the way, and TFS can actually work as a communications hub as it was supposed to always be. There is another feature of TFS which I'm going to be, that's related to team membership and how this enables team membership. And it's in specifically in the how you manage backlogs, the sprint backlog. I'll come back to that as soon as I get to the next part. So right now, let's move on and go back to our presentation. Oh yeah, the URL that you would like to take a look at is tfspreview.com, and that should redirect you to the actual, I think it's tfsalm.com. I will take a look at it in just a bit for the actual one. So going back to our presentation here, let's now focus on the second piece, and that would be, how does TFS enable you to enact Agile events? So if you look into the cycle here, and by the way, this picture has been adapted from MSF Agile 6.0. See, so MSF Agile with Visual Studio 2010 is actually Scrum with a what we would call an XP nomenclature. It uses iterations, and it uses some nomenclature which is more natural to everybody else in the Agile community. But essentially what we're doing there is the cycle of Agile project management that starts with product planning by having the product owner go over a backlog, and that backlog would represent all the requirements in terms of user stories, or in the Scrum parlance, you would call it a PBI. And also you have, following that cycle, you have sprint planning, a sprint planning cycle. So that is, you work in Scrum first with the bigger event, which is planning the product as a whole, doing release planning. And then you go through as you go into the iteration or the sprint, you plan the sprints, and then you go through the sprint itself by having daily Scrum meetings. And at the end of the day, you want to have a shippable increment, which is what we call an artifact. The shippable increment is the artifact as a result of this process. So the events are essentially then the sprint, the planning meeting for the sprint, daily scrums, the sprint review, and the sprint retrospective. Joseph, I'll go to your other question in just a bit, as soon as I'm able to get a little bit of flow here. So in order for me to talk about those events, I have to talk about the Scrum, those two Scrum artifacts, the product backlog and sprint backlog. So I will start my demo of the Scrum events with Visual Studio by talking about first about product backlog and sprint backlogs in the context of Visual Studio. So let me go back and share my monitor again. So as you guys can see here, if I go to my main page, for instance, for this project called Fabricam Fiber Team, I have a view of things that are going at this point. By the way, this is the web view, the web version, and there are two things that are important for us to understand what we're about to do. One is the product backlog here on the leftmost side. Oops, let me change this back here. So the product backlog right now has, oops. Let me try it again. By the way, I'm using zoom in so that it's easier for us to talk about. Interestingly, why am I not being able to? Okay, now I can do it. So we have 9 work items in the product backlog, and I also have a sprint backlog. Looks like I need some training on Zoom it. And I have a sprint backlog with 20 work items. So let's take a look down into them, right? My product backlog is essentially a ordered list of what we call work item types called product backlog items. So those product backlog items are essentially requirements, but they can be anything in Scrum. So if you have an issue, you can put it in the backlog. If you have, let's say, something that needs to be taken care of as a risk, you put it in the product backlog. Basically, there are things that the team need to work on, and they need to be also prioritized by the product owner, right? So notice that my backlog also includes bugs in here. I want to be able to essentially to prioritize or order my effort for the team throughout everything. Bugs, and if your Agile template has something else, such as, for instance, quality of service like you used to have in the MSF 4.2 or anything else that you decide to create, these should all be part of the backlog so that they, following real Scrum, you have to basically prioritize them together as a team and not just, in some separate list. Another very popular item that also comes here as a product backlog item is what we call the technical debt item, meaning that you have a list of things that you have to do, and you don't know exactly when this is going to be done, and you don't know how to add that to the project. Well, the answer is in Scrum as well. Add it to the backlog, and then we will prioritize it together, right? So the generic product backlog item is a way of doing this. And Also, I want to show you here what PBI looks like. So you have a description, you have requirements that we capture in terms of storyboards, you have associated test cases, and you have associated tasks. That is, test cases, how it's going to be tested, tasks, it's how it's going to be implemented. And you can also have acceptance rights here. We're going to come back to that in a bit. And you also have, other items here which are ancillary to help us here, but the story of how things have been done so far, and the links that the item holds to something else. We'll come back to a product backlog item later. Now, let's just take a look at the other backlog, which is the sprint backlog. So once you get into a sprint, you'll be able then to work on the specific items that were selected from the product backlog to work on that period of time, right? So a few things about the sprint backlog is that you have what we call an editor, right? And here you see that this query, I can customize it in a way that I can see whatever results I'm going to add to my sprint or whatever work items. No need to go into this right now, but bottom line is that this is pretty much very much customizable. So now you have an idea of the two basic artifacts. I'll come back to them in just a bit and talk a little bit more about how you can customize this. At this point, though, let's go back and talk about those events that we were referring to. The first event is the release planning. When you go through release planning, you're going to use the product backlog, and the best way to do release planning is to use the board and take a look at everything that is being done so far. Sorry, wrong board. The sprint board, and these are the items that you have for that particular sprint and product backlog. So you don't actually have to have everything ordered or separate like the views that I was showing. But normally you would have those as a way to make sure that the information doesn't get crowded when people are trying to use TFS. So that's why you have my queries and shared queries, because people then can then take just a slice that they're working on or things that they're committed to into their own personal backlog. So the my queries view is a way for you to say, okay, well, things that are assigned to me, in this case here, I don't have anything because some of those items, they do not have anything assigned to them, but in this case, well, this one is assigned to Brian Keller. I could create a new query, but in this case, I have already one query here that is those assigned to me. And the assignment piece is one thing that a lot of people have asked, well, but in Scrum you don't assign anything. You're not assigned things. You are pretty much you commit to something in the backlog. Well, that's okay. You have to understand that TFS has to adapt to several nomenclatures, so you can interpret the field assigned to me, right? That each has in here, or assigned to. You can interpret this as something that it's either, if you're using Waterfall, that the project manager assigns to you, or if you're using Agile and Scrum, it doesn't get assigned to anyone. So whenever you create a new work item, and let me show you here what happens. Notice that the assigned to is not filled anymore like it used to in the past. In the past, if you created something, it would be assigned to you. But now, leave it open, right? So bottom line is, this is just a way to say that you're committed to a piece of information, right? Or a piece of delivery. It doesn't mean that you have to abide by that nomenclature. You can change this to committed to, or I will do this. You can rename that field so that it fulfills your idea of how Scrum nomenclature should go. The bottom line is that the TFS allows you that flexibility of understanding how this is done, and it allows you to enact the principle that each person in a Scrum team should pick what they want to do. So going back to the way that backlogs work, if you're doing the planning, the release planning, the best way to do this is go to the backlog and then turn what we call forecast. If you turn forecast on, right, notice that here I turned it off. By turning it on, I can create a velocity, or I can use my previous velocity and then verify how I'm going to do things in the future sprints by filling in the buckets based on my team's current capabilities. So for instance, let's say that I have a velocity of 6. Notice how this changes. Actually didn't change that much here. I change it to 5. Well, it did change. If I go back to 10, notice how it changes again. You see that now 4 is added. So what we're doing here is that if my velocity is about 10 requirement points per sprint, then it's gonna forecast option will give me this forecast of what I'm gonna be doing. Now notice that this comes back to that agile principle of that's in the manifesto, the principle that we have to be able to respond to change over following a plan, right? So if I look into Visual Studio, it's exactly what I'm doing here. I'm being able to, if for some reason my velocity, my team is not able to do as much as they could before, my release plan, or what it seems like I'm going to be providing in the next few months or a few sprints, changes depending on what I can do. So this flexibility in the tool is a response to the need of teams to be flexible in doing their planning. So you see, I still have a plan here, and this is my release plan. It's just that plan might change depending upon the current capabilities of my team. So when going then through the events, I'll do the product planning, and then I'm going to do, as I go into the iterations, I'm going to do the sprint planning. For the sprint planning, I'm going to use the sprint planning board. So as you can see here, for sprint 3, I have items that are in the sprint backlog, and those items are we have several lanes of to do, in progress, and done. So I have a few items which are already done, a few items which are in progress, and a few items that are still being done. Now, notice how easy it is to move something. Let's say I see here that Keller has a lot of stuff planned for him, and that, let's say, who is more loaded here? And then the natural question would be, who can take some stuff from Keller? Looks like he's got a lot of stuff in his place. I can go then to the team members view, and this is the other team membership capability that I was talking about, that I was going to show when I got to a sprint backlog. That's very cool. See here that I can see that Ann Harriman, for this sprint, she's got 6 hours left. Keller has got 12. Cameron, he's the one who's got the more to do. He's got 15 hours. So let's move a few things from Cameron to someone else. So Cameron, he used to be the owner of the Visual Studio database team project, or database extensions for Visual Studio. So I'm going to move this other one to Ann, and by that I just click the name Cameron, and here I can, we're in the sprint planning meeting, and say, hey Cameron, can you take over this update store procedures from Cameron. He is too busy now. And then say, okay, sure. And then that naturally goes to Anne as soon as I choose the name, right? And then she can get started today by moving it around here. So easily done. See, we're in the meeting, not on the way. You have people talking about this, and they're committing to things that they're doing. So it's very, very cool how this can be done. Okay, so the next event that we're talking about is the daily Scrum. Again, this would be the view that you would do your daily Scrum with, right? So in this case, you would focus on what you're planning for today, what you've done yesterday, and if you have any impediments. At this point, if there is any need, you can actually create a new impediment and add it in the backlog if you wish. While you're doing the daily Scrum, you can create an impediment and then assign it to the person who is at that point, or the Scrum Master. And the Scrum Master will be the person responsible during the day, throughout the day, to make sure that the impediment is resolved, or if not in the day, as soon as possible. So finally, as you go through the development cycle, you have to go back again to the board. The end of the next event would be that you would have to do a review by the product owner. And the working software review, right? Remember that the measure of progress as a principle is that working software over comprehensive documentation is the measure of progress. So what we would like to do is to have the customer to look into working software every time that they have to validate something. Well, for that, we have to first verify, okay, did the work get done as planned? And for that, we take a look, okay, yeah, here we see, this is what was going to be done, review application design with technicians, all of the items in this one, technician can see tickets on the window phone. They are complete, so this should be done. So the product owner can come here and say, hey, let me take a look at this one. So what was my acceptance criteria? Well, I don't have any here, but let me just put one, something like, if this is about technician can see service tickets, I can look at the details of the tickets and make decisions about what to do next. Notice that this is just structured, unstructured text. You can translate that acceptance criteria to test cases, and we're going to talk about this in just a bit. But right now, I just want to show you guys how you can have then that criteria. So as you're going through the sprint review by the customer, by the product owner of what's being delivered, he will go then to this left-hand column and see, well, whatever is has got everything done, right? He will go then there, verify the feature, the demo of the feature, and mark it as done. Of course, you see here that those two at this point, right, they are not done yet. Customers with Canadian address is not done, and at that point, you would see that my backlog only has a lot of things to be done, and it looks like I'm not going to be done on the proper dates, on the 18th, like planned, in 2 days. So those are primarily the events that we were talking about in terms of an agile process, right? So as a reminder here, the events we're referring to were those: the sprint planning meeting, the daily Scrum, the sprint review, and the sprint retrospective. Oh, I didn't add the sprint retrospective, but the sprint retrospective is where you go to I'm just going to share my screen, my secondary monitor right now. So the sprint retrospective is where you go to validate that the process that you're following right now is good or not. So it would be normally a meeting where at the end of the day, you just basically you add a new work item to take care of how you're saving things. Notice that I don't have a sprint retrospective item here, right? And you can record it in several ways, or for instance, you can record it in the sprint configuration. We can do that in just a bit. But bottom line is that you have the option to create a new work item, either a product backlog item or a task, and in that item record the results of the retrospective and have it as an action item for the next sprint. That's usually what I've been doing, which is I want to make my retrospectives become alive. I just create a new task or a new PBI that says, hey, we have been going too much over the 15-minute period for my Scrum meeting, so we have to do that less, and that becomes a PBI that we have to emphasize for the next iteration, right? So that's one way of doing it. Right now, I don't have there's no clear, recommendation on how to do this, other than creating a work item to take care of this. Notice that you can also come here and you can configure iterations and how those iterations are marked. In a previous version of Visual Studio, we had sprints as work items, and those work items you could actually add a field. And that field I used to put the description or the results of the retrospective for that sprint. So right now we don't have this anymore on this particular version. So I'm having to adapt by using a PBI or a new item that I'm calling just retrospective results. So as you can see here, I can configure my sprint with a name. Notice that the tool itself says iteration name, which is basically in Scrum using sprint as the iteration name. The start date and the end date, and the location in TFS work item hierarchy, right? That is, I'm saying that this is going to be within release 1, as an example. Okay, now going back to my documentation. So, Jaina, we have until 1:30, right? That's what I'm planning for.
Yes.
Okay. So good. Now let's go back and now share the PowerPoint presentation again and move on to the next aspect of enacting an agile process or enabling an agile process with Visual Studio. So we were talking about this, and we talked about the events. Now let's talk about the artifacts themselves. I know the order is inverted, but I did this because for 2 reasons. First is that I'm following the order of the Scrum Guide, right? And second is that I couldn't talk about the increment until now because it was not necessary for the previous discussions. And we've already talked about product backlog and sprint backlog. So what is an increment? An increment, and as you might remember, it's one of the principles of Agile to deliver increments, right? Let me go back in here. Working software over comprehensive collaboration, but in the Agile Manifesto, and let me show you here the 12 principles of Agile Manifesto. I need to share my main monitor again. For some reason, it doesn't stay in the list, Jaina. So every time I have to reshare it again.
Okay.
It's taking a little bit longer. I don't know Okay, here it is. So I just went to the Agile Manifesto websites, and I clicked the 12 Principles of Agile Software. You can see here, one of them is deliver software frequently from a couple of weeks to a couple of months, preferably in a shorter time scale. And working software is being the primary measure of progress, right? That's why we want to see that software working once in a while. And I want to make sure that you guys had seen this, because when we talk about Agile, we're not just talking about the 4 main principles. We're talking about all these as well. So the bottom line is that we are supposed to deliver every couple of weeks, right? And we call these deliveries increments. Now, Scrum has a very clear meaning to what an increment means, and it's a slice of the application, right? And that slice can be understood as a vertical slice across the tiering of the application. So when I'm creating a new story for my backlog, I want to create that story with tasks that will go through the presentation tier, to the business logic tier, to the data persistence, and sometimes even infrastructure tiers, so that the increment works back to back. It's something that I already had working software, and now I'm adding another increment, and after I get this increment done, I will continue to have working software. So that increment cannot have dependencies on anything that's going to come later, right? Meaning, if I'm delivering something, it can build upon what's already out there, but it can't not, depend on anything that's going to be coming later. That's why you have to think about your architecture in terms of a vertical slice. Now, the way that you enact this with Visual Studio, and then I'm going to jump into the virtual machine again, is that you're going to get your tasks created in the backlog at a level that defines what you're going to be doing. So as an example here, I have my first requirement, which is customer can find the nearest Fabricam fiber location. Then I have one first task for the data tier, another which is more like a planning task, another which is more for an architectural design review, and then you have another one which is the UI tier. But I actually would have to continue expanding this and have tasks that also take care of the business tier or the orchestration tiers. And this would then define an increment. So each of those requirements then, or PBIs in the Scrum parlance, they should be independent from one another, and they should be able to be rolled out independently. Now, there is an acronym that's used quite often, and it's called INVEST. Each user story, or PBI for that matter, if it represents a requirement, it should follow the INVEST. INVEST stands for, it should be independent from one another. It should be negotiable, meaning that the customer can, I can talk to the customer and add or, take features out. Meaning I can put it into a backlog, order it, and it can be deemed as more or less important than another requirement, so that I can then decide what's going to go first or next. If a customer comes to me and says that everything is priority number one, then he's telling me that it's not negotiable. And that's not what I want. I want to be told that some things are better or easier or more important to implement now than later. And that's what I mean by negotiable. So the V, invest, so we're talking about the INVEST acronym. And the V stands for invest. The V stands for, I forgot what the V is for right now, and I had this at the tip of my tongue just a few minutes ago. Let's go for the E, and then I'll come back to the V. The E is estimable, right? It's got to be something that's estimable. The S stands for small, meaning something that's got to be able to be done within a sprint so that I'm able to deliver the full increment. The T stands for, I'm going to go to my cheat sheets, guys. Look at the presentation I've done on this last week and get my acronym from there. It's funny how when you start using the acronyms, how you pretty much lose the way that you have it on a day-to-day basis. And here you go. Invest. It's not really that important for our presentation, but as a reminder, then invest stands for independent, negotiable. It's got to be valuable, of course. We're providing value to the customer. So if it's something that's deemed as not important, and by that I mean that if you put a PBI into the backlog and that PBI is not deemed important by the customer, then you have to take it off. Now, what if you add, for instance, finalize or fixed architecture and as a technical debt PBI? Then you have to talk to the customer and explain to the customer about the value of that, right? So the customer has to perceive the value, and when you deliver that, the customer has to know that they're paying for something that's valuable. And of course, guys, the T stands for testable. And that, of course, is a cue for us to continue in the presentation by looking at the next step. So remember, independent, negotiable, valuable, estimable, small, and testable. By the way, this is from Bill Wake. You can find it if you look for Bill Wake. I can send you the URL later. You will be able to find the source of this acronym. I'm going to add it. I'm going to add this to the link on the side here. So now you can see then how by being able to create PBIs or requirements and by being able to prioritize them, I'm able to fulfill those qualities that every requirement has to have, right? And that's the main thing that you have to understand when looking at the architects that Scrum asks you to work with. When you think of an increment, that increment has to be self-contained. And it's got to be tied to a build, and that build has to be working software that the customer can then go and evaluate at the end of the iteration. Now, with that, let's go back to our deck. And let's talk about another feature. And that is the definition of done. In the Scrum Guide, the definition of done has a prominent place because it's something that causes the most issues between customers and developers. Is that they never agree to when do you know when something is going to get done, right? I mean, there is the classic picture of a guy asking for something. The guy asks for a small for a house. The customer is thinking of a castle. The developer is thinking of a hut. So then you have the conflicts. It's because they did not work on the definition of done. So Scrum then makes it, and so do the other Agile methodologies, make it clear and some more than the others, make it a clear prerequisite for you to work on anything. You got to have some criteria of done attached to it, right? So this is something that is important to understand. The definition of done is the way that you evaluate that increment that's being delivered. So therefore, it's got to be recorded somehow in the system, and product owners have to have access to it at all times, and they have to be able to access it at the moment that they're doing the sprint review or the increment review. Now, team members, they have to have a shared understanding. So this mechanism has to be able to record whatever decisions were made and the understanding that eventually, there is a consensus. You have to understand how you came to that decision. And finally, if you have a certain definition of done that's more stringent, people are asking for bigger, more quality on some aspects, this will constrain the work that you do in terms of doing things earlier or later. And TFS has to support that too, meaning you have to be flexible about that. That is, the definition of done, it evolves, right, as you go through the process of delivery. So in the initial releases, you might have just a couple items as part of the definition of done. But for instance, at Microsoft, they add a lot of items, like for instance, you have to pass the localization tests, you have to pass a lot of tests. Now, so how does TFS enable you to enact or to do the definition of done in your Agile process? It's quite simple. And let's go back then to Visual Studio. Now I'm back here in the sprint backlog, and again I'm looking at the work items. So let's take a look at how a work item looks like. Notice that I'm looking at a product backlog item. And, So this product backlog item, as you create it, it adds this string here. As a type of user, I want some goals so that something gets done. Well, what that translates to is that this is essentially the prototype of a user story, if you guys are familiar with user stories. So PBIs can be user stories, and Microsoft by default added that text as a way for you to, have that shorthand if you need to, without having to bother about typing it every time. But it doesn't have to necessarily be so. You can just take this down and whatever you want here in terms of defining the PBI. What really matters, though, is that when you're creating the PBI, and by the way, the person that creates the PBI should be the product owner or a business analyst working on behalf of the product owner, right? And when I say that, is that it means that for purposes of the the Scrum scene, the business analyst will be the product owner, right? And the other guy then becomes a chicken or a stakeholder. So what matters really here is that the acceptance criteria has to be well defined as something that will be, from the eyes of the customer, be done. So for instance, the requirement here is customer can find the nearest Fabricant fiber location. Well, my acceptance criteria would be that as I go to the map, I should be able to see a clear indication of where I am. The customer can write whatever they want here. It's up to you to define that into requirements and testable requirements. So from the customer perspective, this is the customer telling you what they want and you having a written record that the customer said that. Notice that in history here, right, I have now a record of changes that were done as soon as well, this one particularly has already been approved, so we're adding stuff to something that's been approved. Let's go ahead and get in my backlog something that's brand new and is still being done. So let's go to the board here, and let's say technicians can see tickets on their Windows Phone. It's being done. yeah, I've already done something here, and notice that I take a look at all the changes, and this is what I say, that I have a track record of everything that was discussed, right? And that track record is what allows me to have a civil conversation with the product owner later. So if the product owner changed something, and then I can go back and always find it out. So you see, this enacts that collaboration versus negotiation piece of the Agile Manifesto. So we're collaborating with the customer, right, over just negotiating contracts and so on. And also I'm allowing the customer to change the criteria of acceptance if they want to, right? As long as we all agree, they can come back here and they can add a new item and say, of course, you don't want this being changed in the middle of the sprint. Pretty much you would want the customer to work prior to the sprint to finalize what they think about as an acceptance criteria. Now, that translates to as well in the testability side of the requirement. Remember that in the INVEST acronym, the T stands for testable. Well, that's not essentially something that's written as a mandate on any Agile or even Scrum manual, but it might be a good idea to translate each of those requirements into test cases, either using what we call TDD, test-driven development, where we start by creating the test cases and translating them into user stories. Sorry, translating them onto those user stories into unit tests first, and then later adding those as part of your build for validation, or you can create test cases here as something that will be first a manual test. How do you do it? Is by getting here and creating a new test case. In this case, linked worked item. You see tested by. It's a test case, and I'm calling it say test ticket or verify ticket details if ticket details are present. So I'm looking at the acceptance criteria right here, right? And I'm finding a way to translate it into tests that I will later enable in my first as manual tests and then later as automated tests. So I just do this. So now I've just created, a manual a test. I'm not going to be able to create manual tests in this particular view, but what I can do is normally, in order for me to edit this, I have to go back to Test Manager and do it, but I was hoping that I would just jump into that. But in order to do that, you have to be using Team Explorer. But bottom line is that this is the new test case that I'm about to save, and notice that it has a backlink to the requirement that I'm testing. So this way I'm creating a chain of items that allow us to connect effort stage by stage, allowing then for us to have another value that Agile values a lot, which is complete transparency, right? And from the beginning, from the user stories, the PBIs, to the tasks, to the tests and the bugs that you find later, to the builds, how everything is connected. So as I save and close this one, I can later open it in Test Manager and add the manual steps if you wish. But now I have my first one. So look at the details, and then there is something like make decisions about what to do next. So I'm going to interpret something like verify that customer, or in this case, customer is going to be technician, can choose between actions for troubleshooting. Basically, it means that the person is on the website and you have to be able to navigate to this or that place afterwards. So it's basically an if. But how that is going to be translated, it doesn't matter at this point. What it means is that I've now mapped my verbal acceptance criteria for my stakeholder to something that is testable, right? That the tester or the developer who's doing the tests, remember that everybody in the team is a developer, will be able to then create something that maps to those. Of course, don't take that for granted that by passing all test cases that the acceptance criteria is fulfilled. You can only say that if the customer says or adds something like in the acceptance criteria that this should be fulfilled by test whatever, right? Because sometimes customers will have an idea of what their acceptance criteria is and you're not sure, so that's why you have to refine it so that the developers and testers understand very well what the acceptance criteria is. Save and close this. And now let's go back a little bit to our deck. And think about what we just saw. So this definition of done, right? So I'm able to look at my code as I create a build and that build gets tested. And it gets tested and associated with my particular set of test cases. I also saw how those work items, so how those product backlog items are mapped to tasks. And as the tasks progress from to do to in progress to done, I know that the tasks are done now. Does it work? I validate, and then I can close that PBI and marking it as done after looking at my own done criteria that I recorded it, a month ago or 2 months ago. So that's the view that the product owner will have of Visual Studio when doing their Scrum or Agile management activities. And we pretty much now, as you can see, we have now covered all the items that define the pillars of Scrum. So that is, I have taken a look at how we can enable the team side of Scrum, the event side of Scrum, the artifact side of Scrum, and the being done side of Scrum with Visual Studio. Well, you would say, well, that's a given. You guys from Microsoft created a template to fulfill exactly what Scrum was, so that's a given that's going to be there. Well, it's the other way around. Scrum and other Agile methodologies existed, and this Scrum template is just but one of the renderings or the possible renderings that you can have of Scrum. There are other ways of doing Scrum with TFS, as you might be familiar with previous templates. The Conchango template was a very famous, very well-crafted template as well. It's still being used from EMC, so there is another way of, you can do Scrum using that one as well, as there are other customizations, right? In the same way, each team and each company will define ways of doing Scrum and will therefore have ways of working with their own customers in slightly different ways, slightly different, choosing different states and, adding extra states instead of just to do, in progress, and done. I've seen teams add, for instance, in testing and then done as a way to track also. And also Kanban, or Kanban, some people say Kanban, but the right pronunciation is Kanban, is that is an add-on on top of what you can do with Scrum. And therefore, the idea of Agile in general is enactable or realizable with TFS for any kind of Agile methodology, and not just Scrum, not just MSF Agile, and not just MSF CMMI. Feel free to experiment with customizing it in your day-to-day activities. So to finalize our conversation, I like this slide because it summarizes what is Visual Studio about. It's about ALM, teams without barriers, and continuous value delivery, right? We showed how with this integration, with this capability of doing traceability and to use TFS as a collaboration hub, you can get faster cycle times that all drive to the right side continuous value. Faster deliveries, balancing being agile at the same time having enough scope and quality to be to go about your business. Revenue growth would be an indirect, consequence, right? But it's an important one. And of course, cost reduction as you are faster to deliver things. Ecstatic users. And you can do this by, if you promise your users that you're going to have something working from the very beginning in the first month, this allows you to have that ecstatic user capability. The tool itself doesn't do this, right? It's not the tool that's doing this. Is your usage of ALM with an Agile process with Visual Studio is allowing you to get those ecstatic users. And finally, and I think the most important one, is the realized value opportunities. As you guys might remember, there is a lot of failures in the industry, and notice that even in the Agile side, you have 49% of projects challenged. This is unrealized value. So it means that either those teams didn't know Agile, or the customer didn't know Agile, or the tools didn't allow them to do Agile as it should be. It remains to be researched, and I would like to see something detailing this, but from what I see is that mostly, from what I've seen in the details of this report, it's because mostly the teams were not applying Agile as it should be. Agile now is at 10 years plus, right, in terms of its history. So to put it in perspective for those who are on the phone, it's the equivalent of when Agile was released, or was when the manifesto was written in 2001, it was 10 years after 1991. Well, in 1991, IBM was still doing a lot of mainframe development. It was still the king of all software developers, and then Microsoft was barely on the horizon with Windows 3.0. People were doing all sorts of experimentation with software development, so it was really. So we are today, in relation to how Agile was, in the same position. And this is the nice thing about it, is that 10 years later, Microsoft was able to fulfill or to deliver a tool that is now widely recognized by the industry as a tool that fulfills, from the tool perspective, the Agile ethos, what Agile is about, right? Again, I'm not saying that the tool gives you all that Agile promises, but it's a tool that enables you, augments your capability of doing so. With that, guys, I just would like to talk a little bit about what we do at Neudesic. Just show this is going to be in the final deck. We are specialized in my area as the national LM architect. We specialize in application lifecycle management, and we're a Microsoft partner. And we have a lot of experience, and we have several customers to vouch for us. So feel free to talk to us. And in the deck, you'll see not only my this information, but also my email, which I unfortunately forgot to put in the first slide here. But I'm adding it to the conference call. Just a window over here. And here you go. So I think we have about. I would like to stay 5 more or 10 more minutes for Q&A if you guys would like to. With that, I'm closing the presentation, and we can move on to Q&A. Jaina, please.
Thank you, Clementino. I just wanted to check with Joseph on his question, the PHP project and source codes be stored on TFS, if he felt like that question was answered. If you had any more additional questions on that, feel
Actually,
free to...
that question, sorry, was not answered, and thank you for reminding me of that.
Sure.
So guys, while you're thinking about other questions, I can talk about this. So, well, you can manage PHP projects and code in TFS. TFS is basically also a source control capability, right? So as a source control capability, you can use it like any other source control system, and you can store the in TFS, and that's transparent. Now, I think you might be thinking about Visual Studio solutions, right? Do we have a solution for PHP? That I would have to research. I can't recall if there is a solution that's built into TFS, and I'm looking at it right now. If anybody else in the call knows this out of the tip of their head, let me know. Let me see here. PHP solution projects for Visual Studio. Remember, Visual Studio is the backend, is the server side. So yes, Visual Studio can and will keep PHP project and source code files. You just use the TFS team client to interact with your items. So I've got an answer here by Iqbal that there are no solution projects for PHP in Visual Studio. But again, as I said, you can manage anything with TFS source control. You can manage text. You can manage even documentation if you wish. So therefore, you can manage PHP projects in source control TFS. What you don't have is the integration with solutions like you have with C# and other type of projects. Although some PHP tools do have some level of integration with the work item piece. You have to take a look at Mylan. And Mylan will allow you to also not only integrate with TFS in an indirect fashion, but also so I'm looking here for, I think it's TFS, Mylan TFS integration. If I can find the link here. Yeah, it's actually it's a desktop connector. So this is where you have to look for it. And this will allow you to not only use TFS on one environment, other environments as well. Any other questions? Oh, Malin also mentioned here that you would have to add file extensions. Yes, and in fact, there is an SCCM adapter for Visual Studio. It can work with some tools. I've seen it, for instance, work with some legacy kind of tools. I would have to see what kind of a typical PHP editors are there available and if they would be enabled by this, right? But yes, you most likely would have to add the file extensions so that they are recognized by the Visual Studio environment, or if you're using the PHP editing environment, that then you could have what we call the MC Microsoft or Microsoft Source Control MS CCS, something like that. Extensions, and with that might be that allows some kinds some certain tools to add within the tools themselves some capabilities of enacting or working with TFS. Any more questions? Okay, Jaina, I think there are no more questions, so I think we're good to go.
Well, thank you, Clementino. Feel free to still type questions in if you'd like. I'm going to take over as presenter here and put up 4 quick poll questions. If you wouldn't mind taking a moment to answer these, we really appreciate your feedback. Here's the first question. And I'll keep toggling through these if you don't get a chance to answer, but I want to catch as many people as I can before the call ends. And as a reminder, you can request a copy of the slides directly from our presenter today, Clementino de Mendoza, directly in the IM window, or make a request to him via his email address at Neudesic. So I'm going to put up the third poll question now. And I'd like to thank Microsoft partner Neudesic and Clementino de Mendoza for their presentation today. Neudesic presents Scrum and Agile Management with Visual Studio 2012. And I'm going to toggle to the last poll question here. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, this concludes today's online meeting. Thank you for joining us. And once you finish the poll, you may now disconnect. Thanks.